Why do Jujutsu Kaisen fans hate Nobara? She's a cool character, but especially after the end of Jujutsu Kaisen, she's become a weirdly overhyped character. And I say weirdly because some people think she's the best female character in Shonen, but many other people think she's total trash. Naturally, if you're a Jujutsu Kaisen fan, you might be wondering why people either completely love her or think she's the worst character ever. So in this video, I'd like to revisit Nobara's history throughout the series, discuss the recent controversy surrounding her appearance in the end of the manga, and explain why people hate Nobara so much. And in case it isn't painfully obvious by now, this video will contain major spoilers. On that note, let's talk about the biggest controversy surrounding her character, namely her revival in the Sukuna fight. Actually, that's the first problem right there, because technically it was not a revival. Technically, it was like an awakening. Well, awakening is a bit more epic than what really happened. What really happened is that Nobara was probably injured for like 50 chapters, and then for the rest of the story, she was just napping on the sidelines until the characters were like, "Nobara dear, it's 5 chapters until the end of the story. You ready to maybe be a part of the final arc, sweetie?" And boy, was she a part of it alright. Nobara is out of commission for what, like 200 chapters? Wait, was it 100 or 200? Editor, can we get a confirmation on that? Anyway, she's out for a really long time, like basically half of the story. And then she doesn't come back until 5 chapters before the story is over. But when she does come back, she's practically handed one of the biggest roles in the Sukuna fight out of any of the characters. Well, Ouji was the self-proclaimed PvP, but he's also gross, so we won't give that to him. So there's 2 things we gotta talk about. First, the fact that she was gone for like half of the story just to come back. And second, the fact that nobody really likes how her return was executed. With this first problem, it isn't so much the time she was gone as much as it is why she was gone in the first place. Because remember, for all intents and purposes, Nobara died. I mean, I don't know about you, but when the big bad of an arc makes a side character literally implode, especially in their face, it's usually a safe assumption that they might be dead. But of course, this is Shonen we're talking about, so there's always the little asterisk. You know, the little disclaimer at the bottom of the page that says, "Warning, may not actually be dead ASFFR." And to be fair, they did say after Shibuya, like, well, she's not really dead, but also it kinda depends, maybe. So at first it was like, okay, so she'll probably come back, right? Like, why else would they say that if they're not mentally preparing us for the comeback? So when the preparation arc went down, we were like, okay, well, the Nobara fans were like, alright, time for Nobara to come back. And then Culling Game starts, and it's like, aw yeah, time for Nobara to come back. And then it was 20 chapters into Culling Games, and it was like, aw yeah, time for Nobara to come back. Then the Culling Games ended, and they brought Gojo back, and they were getting ready to save Megami, and it was like, oh yeah, time for the Nobara comeback? And then they fought Sukuna, Gojo died twice, basically, Yuta killed Kenjaku off-screen, Maki did whatever she did, Hikari, I guess, fought What's-Her-Face off-screen, and Yuji had a slice-of-life episode with Sukuna, and by this point, we had pretty much accepted that Nobara was not, in fact, coming back. And then it was time for Nobara to come back. So hopefully, as you can see, it's not so much the time Nobara was out of the story as much as it was the amount of stuff that happened in the story without her being a part of it. It's practically like she had died and we had already moved on. We had become used to a story without Nobara by the time she was reintroduced. So when she does come back, it's kinda too little too late. Like, yeah, she has a big part in the final battle, but she hasn't been in the story since the first half. And that's the other part of this. The fact that nobody really likes how this was executed due to the fact that her epic moments feel unearned. But before I say more on that, make sure to like the video if you're enjoying it so far. It's the easiest way to support the channel, and it helps spread the video to other viewers like you. Now, part of the reason Nobara's attack on Sukuna feels so dumb is because it feels unearned. And part of that is because of what we just mentioned. The fact that Nobara was out of the story for so long, then she comes back 5 chapters before the very end and suddenly gets to incapacitate Sukuna. So part of it is like, yeah, it is cool, but in reality it feels kinda dumb because all of the other characters have been fighting for their lives out here, and Nobara just gets to yeet back into the story and steal some of the spotlight. And look, I get it. She had to stay on the sidelines so that Yuji and Megami wouldn't know about it and that they could actually pull off this plan against Sukuna. Unlike the dorks on Twitter who claim to know how to rewrite manga, I'm not gonna sit here here and say what if as if I know how to fix the story. That being said, it doesn't change the fact that when I was reading this, it just didn't sit right. Like, yeah, it was cool to have Nobara back, and generally speaking, I am happy that she, Ouji, and Megumi are together again. That was one of the more redeeming aspects of this ending. But I didn't like that I had this moment 5 chapters before the end and at the absolute end of the fight. It's not so much that it was bad, but more the fact that it just feels meh. Like, it could have been so much more. And yet we get basically the same thing we've seen Nobara do before with no real change to her character. And that brings us to the other problem people have with Nobara. So let's say, for the sake of argument, everyone loved Nobara's return and the ending of JJK was a 10 out of 10. People would still have problems with Nobara. And this ending highlights and even emphasizes one of those problems. Namely that Nobara's ability is kinda bullshit. And let me explain what I mean. So Nobara's big ability is resonance. By establishing a link to her target, she can inflict damage to both their physical body and their soul. And she has used it well in all of her fights. But where people take issue with this ability is how it allows Nobara to do more than they feel she's really capable of. Which is a really weird complaint, but one that I guess makes some sense. So for example, using resonance, Nobara was able to stand toe-to-toe with Mahito. Now mind you, Mahito killed Nanami of all people, and Ouji was never able to fight Mahito on his own. He had help from Nanami the first time and help from Nobara and Todo the second time. Granted, it's not like Nobara actually beat Mahito, but the fact that she could actually give him a run for his money thanks to resonance when these other characters who you think are actually clearly stronger couldn't do the same can maybe seem kind of stupid depending on how you look at it. And then of course we have our Sukuna example where apparently distance doesn't even factor in and you can have Nobara use resonance seemingly miles away from the real fight. That, I will admit, seems pretty BS. Not like she did a ton of damage, but still, the fact that she could make such a big contribution miles away does seem just a little dumb. But this is what the haters say. The haters think her powers and fights are unearned. But let's be honest. Nobara trained with Maki and the others just like Megumi did, and nobody says his powers are unearned, and she was kind of the MVP of the death painting fight. She was the one who figured out a way to beat that blood ability. So, does her ability seem a bit crazy? Yeah, but it's just as unearned as Hikari's ability or Takaba's ability or any other ridiculous ability that characters just have. But nobody calls theirs unearned, just Nobara. And when you realize that a lot of the Nobara hate is specific to her character, you start to put together that maybe these problems aren't as bad as people make them out to be, and maybe, just maybe, it's because people have a bias against her character. Which, to be fair, does make some sense. So earlier we talked about how a lot of people will say that Nobara is the best female character in Shonen, or one of the best characters in Jujutsu Kaisen. Now, I don't have a problem with this, but if you're someone in the community who thinks she's just okay, and you hear Nobara fans go on and on about how amazing she is, it's understandable why you might react by saying she's trash. Part of it is the nature of fans of Shonen Jump series. Especially with female characters, people have this thing where we gotta compare everything to Naruto or Bleach. Because of characters like Sakura and Orihime, female character discourse always seems to come down to how useful a character is. So naturally, when you have a character like Nobara that always seems to catch a W and actually carries her own weight in fights, that big contrast is going to lead some people to elevate her character. Personally, I hate this kind of discourse. Like, I don't even like Sakura, and I think she's an important character. But that's just the way it is, sadly. In any event, regardless of the hyperbole, I think Nobara is a solid character. I loved her personality when we met her and she read Ouji and Megumi like a book. I always liked her dynamic in the trio, especially in that one chapter where they found that girl who had a big crush on Ouji. I think without her, that trio becomes less Team 7 and more just two edgy teenagers. And of course, I always love her admiration for Maki and her backstory that revealed some of her motivations. Because of all of this, I love Nobara. I don't necessarily think she's a top 10 character in the series, but I enjoy having her in the story. Because of that, I do think a lot of the hate is ironically unearned. Sure, her ability can seem BS at times, but it's no worse than some of the other BS abilities. And while I kinda hate how her so-called death and return was handled, it still doesn't change how much I like her characterization and dynamics. Nobara is a strong character with great characterization, and Jujutsu Kaisen would be a completely different story without her. But now I'd like to hear what you think. How would you rate Nobara as a character? Do you think the hate is unearned? Share your thoughts and see what everyone else has to say down in the comments. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week on my community tab. And if you'd like another discussion like this one, then check out my last video on Jujutsu Kaisen. In that video, I talk about why so many shonen manga have terrible endings. You can find that video in the playlist linked right here. Until then, thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.